The other day I went to an amazing Joe Dart bass clinic and I left it really inspired by his playing and by his philosophy. So in this lesson I distilled a few of his best tips, and there are lots in this lesson, so do feel free to skip around using the timestamps below. One of the very first things he said was how important it is for him to play to a metronome or a drum loop and just focus on that aspect of playing. I have a basic chord progression based on Matter of Time, which is what the clip is from. And it's D flat 7, 2 bars to G flat 7. And I have a drum loop here. All the resources from this lesson are downloadable for free via the link below. And I'm just going to start by just sticking to a root note groove. Just 2 bars of D flat, 2 bars of G flat 7, and try and make it as in time as I can and make it feel good. That practice of playing to a metronome and trying to keep in time, trying to make every note that you play count, I think is a good one. We can borrow that tip from Joe Dart. I couldn't help but move around a bit melodically. I'm going to talk about that later on in the lesson.
That's the bass line. You know, it's pretty good. And then I add in the ghost notes.
One thing Joe talked about throughout the whole clinic, which lasted about an hour, was rhythm. He really talked about rhythm a lot, and he's a very, very rhythmic player. Now, one thing he didn't talk about actually was scales and notes to play, but I'm going to talk about that soon. But this tip is just the bass as drums. He plays with amazing guys like Nate Smith and Bernard Purdie. And he was talking about taking a very simple groove and then elaborating on a bit, usually with 16th notes and ghost notes. So here's a very simple groove I've got here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. To the drum beat, it would sound like this. I'm going to combine this with the next tip, which is that he has his hand very often in this position here, where he's playing a root note, so for example the D flat, and then his little finger is just ready and waiting to play the octave. And he said that he does a lot of fills and rhythmic embellishments just using that and the fifth. I'm sure you know this pattern. We have a root, the P5 is a perfect fifth or just a fifth, and then the next R, the red blob, is a root note again, or an octave. And his hand is very often in that position to be able to play that. There's the fifth in the middle there. Now in terms of 16th notes, I'll put a lesson here about common 16th note patterns. You have to be subdividing the beat. One thing you notice when you watch Joe Dart play is the way he dances and moves and his head bobs. And that very much is feeling the subdivisions. So you've got, you know, the beats are here, and it's just very natural for him. But you need to learn to split up every beat into 16th notes, which is a very common component of this style of music. So we're going 120 beats per minute in that drum loop, but let's slow down. And really you're just going 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. 16th notes in every single beat. And that needs to become like breathing for you. You just need to feel that. And in terms of 16th notes, there are a few combinations of them. I'll do a few. And that's 8th to 16th, the opposite of that. I'm really nodding my head, tapping my foot, tick, tick, subdividing the beats. And he uses ghost notes a lot. So there, it's just a case of deadening the strings, however you can with your fretting hand. Completely dead. He was using a lot of raking. That's where you take one finger and you drag it from high-pitched string to low-pitched string, so G to E direction. His technique is amazing. He didn't really talk about that too much, but my tip with technique is just to slow everything down, especially when you have fast things like 16th notes going and you have to do things like this. Index middle quite fast. You have to slow that down. There's no other way, really. To speed that up and get it to Joe Dart levels, it has to be clean and it has to be fluid and the mechanics have to be there. That's only achievable by slowing it down, practicing a lot, and just doing that consistently. Sticking to the rhythm theme, he was talking about that what he loves doing most of all, I think he's known for a lot of flashy stuff, but is locking in to the kick drum. And there's a really great example in Back Pocket by Wolfpack. If you have a listen to that, you'll hear the bass locking on. Now it's this rhythm. And if we play it without the kick drum I've got here, it goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here it is with the kick drum. That's actually really good practice. That's 90 beats per minute. I've got it set up in Logic here with no click, so you have to lock in extra with that. But if you download this, put it into your digital audio workstation, then put the click on, it'll be easier to do. But it's just that idea, if you listen to lots of amazing bass lines, they do stick to the kick drum. It's a really, really good tip. Of course, you can play around it. It doesn't always have to be religiously sticking to it, but it's a great tip, something he loves to do. Me too. Despite rhythm being a huge part of his playing, one thing he spoke of is that how he loves to combine rhythm and melody. You think about James Jamerson, you think about Paul McCartney. These are players that do the same thing. They use melody inside the bass lines. Now, one thing I noticed that he never talked about, not even once in the 1 hour, was anything to do with scales, what modes to use, anything like that, even though I could hear he was doing certain things, right? Now, I'm going to go into it a little tiny bit here because you have to know that if you want to put melody into your bass lines. I do have a music theory course and an R&B soul Motown course if you want the Joe Dart style. Those two will help you. But I'm going to look at that D flat, E flat minor, B flat minor example that I just came up with there. Okay, so I was sticking to some rhythm there. No backing track here, just practicing this on my own in real time. This is going to take a little bit of explaining, but I'll do my best right now. So we have a D flat, E flat minor chord, B flat minor chord. Now this is a chord progression and it belongs to a key. The key is D flat major. That's the key, and those are the notes that sort of belong to this key. And when we talk about melody, we're talking about using notes from a scale or from an arpeggio. An arpeggio is just when you play the first, third, fifth, an octave or seventh or ninth. And they they start to sound quite melodic notes. There are really a few ways of thinking about this, but any chord that you see, a scale can be played over it, so D flat. You have your D flat major. A good thing also to think about is pentatonic works really well. Joe Dart was doing that a lot. Over D flat major, you just do D flat major pentatonic. I don't want to overwhelm you too much with scales and modes and things like that, but this is the currency of bass lines. You know, that kind of thing. So D flat is on the 4th fret of the A string. If I go to the 6th fret of the A string, you've got frets 4, 6 and frets 4, 6 on the E string. That pattern. E flat now, E flat minor. You need to know the arpeggio underneath it. E flat minor, E flat minor 7. You know, all those notes work, as does E flat minor pentatonic. And then B flat minor, same thing, B flat minor 7, B flat minor pentatonic. Just these basic things that always work, right? The overall key is that D flat minor, so D flat major. So if I'm doing this, the melodic things over the E flat, well look, root, 5th, octave. I've already shown you that pattern today. Add the 7th in, you have something slightly more melodic. That's the 9th. So octave, 2 frets higher, 9th, always works. Same thing, root 5 octave, 9th, always works. And it sounds more melodic now, doesn't it? Earlier on in the example I did this. I think I stole that lick from Pino Palladino. If you're on the E string and you're playing a B flat, the same fret on the G string, sliding down 1 fret works. And it's things like this. You listen to players like that, or Joe Dart. You figure something out, preferably by ear. You love the sound of it. You practice it enough times, it becomes part of your playing.
And that's holding the rest of my fingers on the string versus...
This is a technique I've done a lesson on before and I love it. This is a left-hand muting technique, which Joe was talking about, that, you know, really Rocco Prestera of Tower of Power is the man for that. So it sort of chokes the note, you get this softer, warmer, short decay. So let's just do this on D flat. If you usually play a note, you'd fret next to the fret and pluck. You get that. What he's doing is just bringing the remaining fingers down, so you're fretting with the first finger, bringing the other fingers down just to, if you touch the strings too much, it will completely deaden it, but just a tiny bit, you get this. You get this incredible tone. And with that, you really have to sort of lead with your first finger. Which is a slightly odd way of doing things, but that's how you get that tone. If you watch his hand a lot, it is doing that in certain passages. He'll then come up with a little flurry. You know, something like that, you're not going to be doing left-hand muting. You need your fingers, okay? So it's just really sort of if you're grooving on 1 note or 2 notes. You get that lovely thuddy tone. I just spoke about that Pino Palladino lick that I stole. Joe was talking a lot about, in terms of playing solos, he was very influenced by Fred Wesley and Maceo Parker, James Brown horn players. And their sort of thing of playing quite simple notes, but call and response. And he'd sort of demonstrated that if we go to E, coming up with a theme, now straight off the top of my head, I'm going open E, high E on the 7th fret of the A string, D 2 frets lower. And that's sort of, you know, an E minor groove, pretty common. I must have played that because it sounds just like a James Brown thing, doesn't it? So we're coming back to this theme. And you've got this call and response thing. Really do listen to Maceo Parker. You'll hear exactly what I mean and what Joe Dart means when you hear that. This kind of theme and then, which is a call, then a response. And this is a classic thing. And I think he's very much rooted in that world of funk and old school R&B and blues, and those kind of ideas are really prominent in those styles.
Kind of chic line, you know, it's that disco thing, and if you play that, like, you know, with enough groove and conviction, you don't actually have to, like, you don't have to riff on it at all, you know.
Coming out of that tradition is creating a really simple hook and just playing it with the most feeling and conviction you can. Can't remember what song he was talking about, but there's a moment in the live shows where the spotlight goes on him and he's like, what am I supposed to do here? And what he was saying is that you can just stick to a really, really simple groove. It's sort of a Bernard Edwards thing. If you listen to a lot of the chic bass drops, it is just the bass line playing what it was before, just exposed. And the groove is just so strong and played with so much conviction that Bernard Edwards and Joe Dart, they don't have to do much else. That's a really fantastic tip, especially if you're doing a bass solo in this sort of style. It's just stick to a groove and just play it with so much groove and conviction. That's come from your practicing along to the metronome and the drum loop. If you do that, the audience and your bandmates, they'll love it. If you take a G minor pentatonic scale, you know, something like that. So we've got G, octave, there's that flat 7 again. Let's use the drum beat. He's absolutely right. You just need to play one simple hook with feel, with conviction, and go for it, and that's all you need to do. Obviously this is a bit more of a funk R&B old school sort of style, you know, it's not going to work for every single style of bass playing, but certainly that idea, play everything with conviction, I love that. This was something he was demonstrating, which is dynamics and accenting your 16th notes. And I think he was doing it in E flat. Something like this. We got 4th fret to 6th fret again on the A string, D flat to E flat, hammer-ons. Things you can play. You've got your E flat minor pentatonic again. E flat blues scale, Dorian. Just playing the root note, just getting used to 16ths. So you've got index, middle, and that's a whole beat of 16ths. Accenting them on different beats. This is an excellent way to develop control and accuracy in your playing. Again, I'm really reminded of Rocco Prestia. What is Hip is a brilliant tune that does that on E, not E flat. Slowing it down, getting that. Again, he wasn't mentioning notes, but I'm thinking minor here. Minor pentatonic. So that's frets 4 to 6 on the E, A, and D strings. All those notes will work. I loved this phrase he used, ear, not gear. He was really talking about that. Now, he was demoing this Joe Dart Music Man Sterling bass. This is the closest I have to that. Now, that bass has got one knob. It's just volume. And it was flat wound strings, more of that in the next tip. You can't really get much simpler than that. And this has got a split coil pickup. This is a Justin Meldal Johnson Mustang bass. Brilliant bass, this. Volume, tone. I've got the tone sort of halfway, volume fully up. It doesn't do anything else, this bass. It just does that, right? There's not much you can talk about it any more than that, really. The setup on this, I mean, I've never set this bass up, and it's sort of, I always go for medium action. And that's one thing he was talking about. Setup is crucial, despite him wanting to work on his musical ear a bit more than thinking about gear the whole time. That's why he's got the simple bass. He just wants to put the volume up, play it, and it's there. But I would imagine his setup is not really, really low, but sort of medium low, I would say, because all those fast sort of things he does. So you might not want a bass like that. You might not want to play the types of strings he uses, but my tip is just to find what works for you. Mark King and Victor Wooten, they use 40, 60, 80, 100 gauge strings. They're really thin and they're really conducive to ultra fast playing. Someone like James Jamerson used heavy gauge flat wounds and a higher action, and he could dig in as an upright player. That's what he loved to do. So you've got to find what works for you, and then my thing is just work on your craft. Don't think about gear too much.
I can't do new strings. This bass is like perfect with these flat wound strings on them. They're basically bright flat wound strings.
I loved hearing that because I'm exactly the same. I don't really like changing strings. These are the strings that came with this Mustang, and I think he said the Music Man strings are the flat wounds, and it's just that kind of thing where you've got old round wound. That's the sort of thing he wants to get. Now, a lot of people ask me what, it's just here off to the side, this bass, my Music Man Stingray 1978, what strings that has on it. Well, they're Elite's Players round wound strings that are old. It's that same Joe Dart thing of, I mean, I don't like changing strings, but I love that sound that basses like that get when the strings are older. This one is a Moonbeam bass, it's called. It's a Ball Family Reserve. Now that is new stainless steel strings, and if I'm doing a rock session or any rock, you can't have that dull sound really. You want something bright, and you know, these strings do it. So when you're thinking about what you want to go for, strings are very important. The Joe Dart sound is that really old school thuddy sort of thing, and that flat wounds on this bass, on his Sterling, it just hits that tone perfectly. So that's a good thing for us bass players to think about. What bass and string combination do we want for our sound?
And that's what you're coming back to.
Very similar to that tip before is just that Bootsy Collins video. If you haven't seen it, I'll put a link to it, where he's always talking about coming back to the one. And that's what Joe Dart was saying as well, as when he plays solos often. You can do anything you like as long as you're returning to this sort of central hook idea. You know, I was going a little bit outside there and just playing any kind of nonsense. But if you're returning to this, that's your hook, that's your familiarity. Now the audience knows subconsciously that you're coming back to that, and they can hang something on top of that, which is why you can do, you can go off. I just did an E minor pentatonic going up a fret, come back down. That adds a nice bit of tension. Just going up a string. You can end up on any note. He's right, it doesn't matter. You know, repetition and themes, those are great things to add into your playing, especially solos. So I think a great exercise to tie everything together for this lesson is to listen to Matter of Time. There's a section where he is just going D flat 7 to G flat 7, and just to use some of these ideas. As I mentioned before, he really wasn't mentioning that much about scales and patterns, and I love to do that in my teaching. So if I was to do this, that kind of thing. We're on a G flat here. That's a walk up from the major third to the fifth. You hear it a lot. I'm very influenced by the same kind of playing Joe Dart is, actually. We're talking Chuck Rainey, James Jamerson, Tommy Cogbill, Carol Kay. These kinds of players, they were using pretty much the same patterns. There's a D flat. That's a major pentatonic. If you add that note in, it's a flat 7. All of these shapes and much, much, much more are in my Music Theory for Bass Players course and the Soul Motown R&B one. And you do need to know these. That's called a Mixolydian mode. It's used a lot in this kind of style, as is that. It's where you go from the flat third to the major third. So there are loads and loads of ways to get from one chord to another, even if you've just got two simple chords like this. But if we go back to the original drum beat and we just take this one idea, and let's try and find as many ways as we can to make it sound really groovy, really great, but to work on accuracy as well. There's a G flat here, and now I'm going chromatically down to the D flat. If you study those kinds of players, well, Joe Dart and the players that he listens to before, always go back to the source. You will hear the same lines, the same notes happening over and over again. And that's why I can't recommend highly enough to study different styles. This lesson was all about one style. I love a lot of different styles, and you get to learn the characteristics of that different style. Right, that was a bit of an epic lesson. Thanks very much for watching. I'll put the links down below to the free resources for this lesson and those other courses. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a like and do subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.